Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Earth podcast by DGP Group. In today's episode, we're joined by Rieks Bosch to explore the amazing possibilities that nature-based solutions can bring to challenging areas around the globe, specifically areas affected by desertification. This conversation surprised me in a very positive way. The projects mentioned by Rieks gave me a very optimistic picture of what the future can be. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. So now, with no further ado, here's my conversation with Rieks Bosch. I just wanted to start asking you, how did you get started working with what you work with today? And how did you get interested in this segment?
Oh, that's quite a long time ago. I was coordinator for natural development of the Dutch coast, and there we thought of this approach for building with nature-based solutions, and we set up the first trial projects for the Netherlands. But at the same time, I was working in Ukraine, or just after that. Then we start thinking from how we can use carbon credits for nature protection and for the financing of nature-based solutions. I've been setting up, together with a couple of colleagues, financing mechanisms for nature-protected areas in especially Eastern Europe. Then I became team leader for sustainable development of the steppe areas in Russia, Ukraine, Moldova. And there we really dove into carbon financing, sustainable development, what are the causes for degradation, and how you can make use of natural processes to improve that. And from there I went from integrated coastal management to water management to land management, mountain, steppe, deserts, and so on.
Amazing. And how did you learn about DGB, and when did you start to work with DGB on the projects that you work with us?
Oh, let me think. When has that been? That's 7 years ago, something like that. I was looking for investors in carbon credits, and then in one way or the other we got in touch with each another, and Selwyn asked me if I would come into the board of advisors. And then we have been assessing all kind of projects, and first in the Netherlands, and then we have been looking around into the steppe areas, forest areas, not to the tropics, but in the more temperated zones.
That's very interesting, because when you usually start hearing about carbon projects, people, I think, immediately default to Africa, South America, these tropical areas which have these really dense, big forests. And steppes, if my geography is correct, is not really a dense forest that you have there. It's more like grass and that lower kind of vegetation. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? What is interesting particularly about the steppes?
Indeed, everybody thinks about with carbon sequestration about trees.
Exactly.
But grass is storing, and also bamboo is storing just as much per square meter, yes, much, or sometimes even more carbon than trees.
Really?
And they don't store it only above the ground, but also underground. When you have the steppe grasses, they store, and the steppe shrubs, like saxaul, they store 2/3 of their carbon sequestration is underground, in the roots. And that is causing the black soil. The black soil, you will have heard about it. It's about with carbon levels of 10, 12, 13%. And that gives the fertile soil from Ukraine, from Kazakhstan and other areas. Because the root remains, they deteriorate very slowly.
I see.
And that goes slower as the organic matter from forest. Organic matter in forest soil deteriorates very quickly, but from grass there's more cellulose, and that goes slowly.
Okay, so let me see if I get it right. From forests, it sequesters the carbon, but it releases the carbon faster than it would compared to grass?
That's right.
Ah, that's really interesting. So, and what kind of grass are we talking about? Is this the same grass that we have in soccer fields here in Brazil, or is it like some different kind of?
Partly, the steppas, the feather grasses, for example, they're going the deepest. They can go with their roots till 4 or 5 meters, and even in a severe drought, they have always access to water. The disadvantage is they don't stand grazing too much.
I see.
As soon as they start be grazed, then they kill part of their roots and turn it over into new leaves. And when you speak about carbon sequestration and regeneration of the steppe or desert areas, then you have to find a balance between the use of the grass for cattle, for example, of wild animals, and the loss of root system.
Yes, this is something that I'm very curious to hear about, because whenever we hear about preservation, restoration, there is always that thought of we could be using this land productively for something else, like for, I don't know, it's, as you said yourself, Ukraine has a very rich soil, which it's very easy to grow things there. So maybe people will think about using that soil for agriculture and not for preservation. So how is that balance done, and how is that calculation done about when should we decide to use a piece of land to preservation or to, produce food that is necessary?
We are always thinking of using land for production, but we should use land to remain the quality. And when you plow land, then you lose every year 1/20 till 1/10% of organic matter. But there are a lot of possibilities to increase the organic matter in soil by crop rotation, by intermediate crops, and so on. And when you speak about the steppe, wild steppe, then you can use grazing on the right moment. Not early spring, not late in autumn, but in the, let's say, early summer, you can use it. That the cows are, or other animals, they are producing manure, they're trampling the seeds. And then you are increasing the vegetation cover. And then you can increase the productivity. I have had trials from where we went from 100 to 200 kilogram per hectare above ground. We went to 500,000. And one exceptional case, more than 1,500 kilogram dry matter per hectare. And that's all carbon sequestration, only you can use the part above the ground in a systematic way. And then you can use also the carbon sequestered underground as for carbon sequestration. And it helps the rural development and creating more income for the local population.
So there is a way to use the land as a protected area, but at the same time, it is productive.
There's a direct link between biodiversity and the quality of the management of the steppe. And good quality grazing, when you double the vegetation cover, then the biodiversity can go up 3-4 times. So you're serving and biodiversity and nature, and you are serving the income for the local population.
That is interesting because, again, whenever you start talking about preservation and sustainability to any business person, they go like, oh no, it's going to cost money. But in this case, it's actually the opposite. It is increasing the income of the local population. So it is productive at the same time as it is
protective. When you look at large scale, for example, Kazakhstan is this moment focusing on intensive cattle breeding. But when they could make use more out of the extensive on the steppe, you have to create conditions like corals, watering points, but then you can make millions of hectares productive. And that serves the local population, it serves the national economy. And the animals which are, let's say, are strong enough to survive on the steppe, they have quite often marble meat. That means that they store the fat not around the muscle, but inside. And they burn the fat inside the muscle in winter. And that builds up very quickly. They don't lose muscle weight. And that's always to find the right animals. But you can also do it by nature protection with the steppe antelope, for example. By protection, their numbers have been going up in some places from several hundred thousands to over 2 million. And that is doing the same job. But the cultivated cattle breeding, you can use it as an extension of that. And then you get more legumes. And quite a few of the wild animals, like the steppe antelope, doesn't eat grass, or hardly, but it eats the herbs. And then the number of herbs are increasing, and that means that they get more protein to survive. So everything is linked to each another.
That is really, really interesting because I think it's just another level of almost climate engineering and environmental engineering, right? It's farming on another level, the next level of farming. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's building with nature.
And is that the solution of what you mentioned last time that we spoke, which is that steppe in Central Asia is being degraded because of the underuse of the land?
Yeah, a lot of people think by degradation of grassy areas on overgrazing, but it's not sustainable grazing, too early in spring and too short grazed, or it is that not enough animals are available. And then there's no tramping, the seeds are not tramped in the soil. The steppe has from nature very low phosphate, and the phosphates would come out of the manure. And there you see the renewal of the vegetation.
And now with the increased use, that is a solution to the issue.
Yeah. And that is solution in Central Asia. It's in the Eurasian steppe, but also in Africa. You have also that same process which can be used.
That is really interesting.
But to organize it, that's the problem. How to bring the land users, governments, how to bring them together and to show them how sustainable grazing, rotational, where every time when 75% of the grass is eaten, then you move to another place, and then you wait till the grass is really regrowing again, and then you don't get the stop of the growing. When you leave enough leaves and enough roots, then you get enough roots, and when you have enough roots, they don't stop growing in between of grazing, but they keep on growing, and that's the way you increase the productivity. The thing is how to motivate the land users that they can increase the productivity of the land. That's not the way of thinking. They look only at the animals, but they don't look at the steppe or the grassland.
Yeah, and that was precisely my question. What is, because it sounds great, like it's increasing productivity, increasing usage. Why aren't people doing this?
One side that you see quite a bit. People are looking at the harvest and not at the source, the quality of the soil, the quality of the vegetation. It's another way of thinking of producing roots instead of producing a grain.
I see.
And that's the one thing. The other thing is that in a lot of cases, the local populations, they have very little access to financing. And therefore, they can't invest in corals, in waterholes, and so on. And for the big investors, they are moving away from agriculture. And because in oil, for example, it's bigger, it's quicker visible that you get profit out of it. You have to take time to go into such a process of improvement. At the same time, by an increased, and that's an access point at this moment quite often, increasing the vegetation cover is decreasing mud flows, flash floods, landslides. And there you can use the argument of hazard reduction, disaster risk reduction, as argument for improvement, which then in parallel offers additional reduced hazards, but additional income for the local population.
So you mentioned that this for the big investors from the outside, it's not that attractive because it takes a long time to get return on their investments. How long are we talking about, and what kind of returns are we also talking about?
You think of return times of 5-7 years. But a lot of the investors, they want to have their investment to get the first profit after 2 years. And the return time of... I worked in tourism on the Black Sea and in Russia. And when the investors didn't get their investment back in 2 or 3 years, then said bad investment. But they have to learn that you have to look for longer term income, sustainable income.
I think this is a very huge challenge because humans are not used to, I mean, we used to be, but we're not anymore used to these long time spans, right? I was reading this book about forests. I think, I forgot the name of the book, if I'm not, I think it's The Secret Life of Trees or something like that. And it talks about the lifespans of a forest. And for a forest or for a tree, 100 years is basically nothing compared to what 100 years would be to humans. For a human, 100 years is a whole lifetime. I mean, not most humans don't get to live 100, but for a forest to actually develop itself, it needs more than 100 years. It needs maybe 500 years to really form the connection
For
between
oak
trees.
forest of Acer forests, you have natural Acer forests in Slovakia, for example. And I've been there one time, and there the old trees are laying in the layers of 6 layers on top of each other. And there you can say you have natural situation. But also an oak forest that takes at least 250 years to become natural and get an optimal development of the whole biodiversity.
Yeah, that's a long time, right? How do
But
you
you don't have to wait so long, because in a forest reforestation, and after 4 years, you start to gain. First, when you plant, you lose a little bit, planting disturbing the soil. But after 4 or 5 years, it starts to gain, and then you don't have to invest anymore, because the nature is investing themselves in and start to reseed. I worked in Pakistan, and there was an agreement between the village and state forestry that they would abandon the grazing from the area because there was nothing to get anymore. It was completely degraded. And they digged holes in which they planted trees. And when I came there was 5 years after the planting. There were nice trees, but under the trees, you had full vegetation cover. And the trees, they start to seed themselves and start to fill up the areas between the planted trees. Like also with Saxul, we estimate that after 7 years, it starts to seed, and then it can add another 50% in a couple of years, 3-4 years. It can add 50% to the vegetation cover, and that's free planting. You create a condition, and then you get the 50% or 100% vegetation cover. You get it for free.
But that, how long would that be? Like at least 5 or 10 years, right?
Yeah. The first seeding, that is not earlier than after 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? Because what we can do to convince people to invest that, and even after those 5-10 years, there's nothing that feasible that you can take out of that land again to justify that investment, right? The return on investment is even longer term than these 5-10 years.
Therefore, you have to find the secondary use, which is increasing the carbon sequestration, and it's creating at the same time income to finance the period in between. And livestock is quite often a good opportunity. In forest, it's a bit difficult. There you have to look for others. In Tajikistan, I've been mixing fruit trees and nut trees in normal forests. And that was creating enough productivity that the local women, they send their men up and said, stay out of the forest because we are gathering there the mushrooms, the nuts and the fruits. And in this way, it becomes sustainable.
Of course. So it's more about finding a way of sustainably making that, again, what we spoke before, right? Finding a way of doing that productively in a sustainable way rather than just putting a fence around it and say, let's leave it there forever.
The fence is quite often not the best solution, because we have been degrading a lot of land, and to stimulate, you can wait and do nothing and wait till it's reproducing again, it's regenerating again, but you can also do a lot to stimulate that. The only thing is degradation goes quicker than the regeneration. When you have a high level steppe, it loses 1/10% of organic matter a year, and by recultivation you can increase it with 1/20% a year. But seeing the large scale...
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I think that's really interesting, and I just really want to grasp it.
By wrong cultivation of the soil, you can lose 1/10% of organic matter per year. And then after 50 years, the soil starts to be depleted, like you see in the Midwest. But you see it also in other agricultural lands in Europe and so on. But by recultivation of it in the right way, you can gain 120, sometimes a little bit more of a percent per year, and that's then for grasslands. The interest that's by itself it's not so big, but the land is cheap and the services are big, and quite often locals of local population, they give the land for free, so you don't have to buy the land to get the carbon credits. I'm working together now with a city in northern Kazakhstan, and they have a lot of abandoned land and land what was by the former industry. In the Soviet time was poisoned. The trees, the forest died. And now they give it for free, a lot of land, 10,000s of hectares, where you are free to plant and to get your carbon credits. And at the same time, in parallel, you can then stimulate the tourism, for example. In, let's say, more urban areas, tourism is a good additional source of income. Like in the rural areas is livestock. You have then the tourism, but you have also you can integrate plots with fruit trees, which are not getting that old, but they are creating also carbon, and they are producing food which can then be add to the local market.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, combines both things, right? The carbon sequestration and the productivity.
But sometimes it's disaster risk reduction, like in northern Kazakhstan, where you had the last year so much floods. One of the solutions is planting more trees in the riverbed, to raise the water level in one place, but on the other place, by the cities, by the towns, you get reduced water levels. The flow is then decreasing. But also on slopey areas, you can severely reduce the runoff by planting. And you get then infiltration, and then it takes 5-10 times longer before the water comes into the river than when it comes to runoff.
So it's a whole calculation, right?
Yeah, it's every time it's an every situation calculation. Okay, what kind of additional gains do you get out of it? In Africa, it might be vegetables growth under the trees. On other places, it's disaster risk reduction. In other places, livestock. And I'm always looking for this kind of added value from the activity.
You know, that's really cool, because I can think of an example right now. So I live in the south of Brazil, and here in Brazil, we drink this tea called mate. It's very popular in Argentina, Uruguay, and the south of Brazil, which is where I live. And when I first started working with DGB and learning about sustainability and all that, the very first idea that I had was a very simple way of increasing, the amount of forests here in the region that I live, and at the same time making it profitable, is by planting mate trees beneath big trees, because we have a very big difference between planted mate, what we call it, and native mate. And the sole difference between both is that planted mate is a huge plantation with a lot of mate trees, and that's it. And they get a lot of exposure to the sun, and that burns the trees and makes them taste a little bit more bitter than they would compared to native mate, which grows beneath, huge trees, and therefore doesn't get in touch with the sun, and it's less bitter. And that makes native mate actually more expensive than planted mate.
Coffee, you have a similar situation.
Where?
Coffee,
really?
Yeah, you have planted under trees. It's less vulnerable for drought, and you get better quality. You have no problem with frost, with night frosts. When you have I was in India, and there they had about 40% tree cover. I said, doesn't it hinder the productivity? I said, it's not stimulating directly, but at the end we get more income out of it.
Yes, because you can charge more for a superior product, right?
And you are not vulnerable, quite a bit less vulnerable for droughts, for example.
Definitely.
And for heat. The plantations which are open, they have now more and more problems with the increasing heat, which is deteriorating the coffee quality. But the ones in the under forest screen, they don't have half too much trouble with that. Of course, the temperature in a forest is quickly 3-5 degrees lower than outside.
Of course. Yeah, it's the same thing. So it's an interesting way of boosting the productivity. Not really the productivity in terms of amount of crops that you get out of it, but the actual income out of it, because it's a superior product. At the same time, being more sustainable and actually sequestering more carbon than you would if it was a regular plantation, right?
One of the issues is that a lot of countries don't understand the voluntary market yet.
Of
They
course.
know about the compliance market, they know about the government to government sale, but therefore you have to develop your carbon administration that is for some countries still far away, because that is not that easy. But the awareness on the voluntary carbon market can still be increased quite a bit.
Definitely, yeah. And maybe I'm getting into a little bit of a touchy subject, but I don't think that, maybe not just the awareness, but also I feel that there are some definitions on the voluntary market that need to be defined in order for it to really, start developing. Because I'm familiar with a couple of companies that are aware of the voluntary market, they are interested, but they're holding off because they still don't know what kind of credits they can use, what kind of carbon compensation is going to be accepted. So maybe that's also one thing, right?
Yeah, in the beginning of 2000, start to work on carbon sequestration. The market was wild. It was a crazy market, and that you get a lot of greenwashing.
Exactly.
That carbon credits were sold in two countries from the same project. But that caused also that the drop in the carbon value went from about 15 US per ton to 1 till 2. And we had to cancel a lot of projects because they couldn't be financed anymore. Now it's under the new procedures, more and more like the letter of authorization and accreditation. The possibilities are getting less. And the guarantees are increasing, and you see that business is willing to pay, especially when it's combined with social and bio credits. They are prepared to pay quite a bit more than in the, let's say, on the wild market, because there's less risk involved for them that they will not get the carbon credits.
And it's all about the quality, right? High quality carbon credits, they are generally safer for businesses.
Some people think the wild ones are the best. No, for one time, I know for some businesses in Korea, they gave gewoon 1 million and then they could write in their yearbook that they were carbon neutral, but no control further on it. And then you have to believe it on the blue ice or the green ice or the brown ice. But now it's getting more integrated. I think the conditions from the UNFCCC can even be stricter in some cases. But there's quite a bit difference between companies, how they approach it and how much guarantee they build in for themselves and for their clients.
Of course, definitely. Coming back to the project side, I have a bunch of questions that I want to ask about a particular project that you mentioned that you were involved, because it is something that I remember when I was in school, so a long time ago. I remember seeing in this geography book 3 images of a big lake that was diminishing every year, and it ended up being just because it was a huge lake and now it's just a desert, which is the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan, right? Now I've heard that DGB is thinking about doing some projects in the Aral Sea, which is something very interesting, and I'm very eager to hear about. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the overuse of, it's not the water has been reduced so much, but it's the overuse of the water resources led to the shrinking of the Aral Sea. And it's a brackish, salty environment, and when the water is out, then you get salty soil. As a result, in the past, you had the dust storms from Afghanistan in, for example, Tajikistan and in Uzbekistan. But now you have also the dust storms from the other side, from the Aral Sea, and that is salty dust. That's even worse, for it's not only dust, sand dust, but it's also salty dust. Now, with, for example, Saxul, that's a shrub a couple of meters high, but it goes quite deep. The roots can go meters into the soil, 10 meters away from the shrub. And they look for where is the least salty part. And as soon as there's rainfall, they suck it up and they store it. At the same time, that is reducing then the dust storm. And what a lot of people forget is that in the semi-desert, that saxul, tamarisk is good food for animals. When you look at the longer term, then you can develop, together with a number of herbs. For example, there's an institute in Uzbekistan, and that have been doing a lot of research from what plants on salty land create not salty food. When you combine them, then you can cook fodder for your animals. But then you have to think quite a steps ahead. When the after 7 years, when the saxul is grown up and start to reseed, and then you can start thinking of reusing the land for food security.
That's really interesting. So let me see if I get this right. There is this specific plant that can grow in salty soil, and it pretty much lays the ground for, in the future, maybe 10 years from now, other plants be able to grow in this ground?
Then you see after about 5 years, you see that grasses, herbs, first the salty herbs, they start to grow in the shadow of the saxul, and slowly they start to seed. And by nature is increasing the density by a factor 2, 3. And you plant 300, let's say 100 they die off. But after 5 years, the 200 are increasing to 400. And but always forget that people look only at the saxul, but under the saxul, you see all kinds of herbs coming up. And you should also bring them into the carbons and to the biodiversity. Number of eagles is increasing, and a lot of also red date books animals, they are increasing.
That's really interesting. And even the ones that die off, they end up becoming organic matter that it's going to enrich that soil, right?
Yeah, you get that the organic matter is quickly doubling, and that means that the water capacity of the soil is also slowly increasing. Not so much by saxul or by trees, but by the vegetation under it. You see that's increasing. When I was in Pakistan, where they said what can we further do to stimulate the growth here? I said, once a year, grazing, soft grazing, 50%, 70% grazing, and then it goes even quicker.
Really?
Because then the manure, the seeds are trapped into the soil, and then the combination of shade, the concentration of water on some spots, because the trees are planted in holes, and then you see a whole new vegetation is coming up.
That's really so. Actually, the glazing of cattle in the region helps develop this environment.
Yeah, and it's reducing not only the dust storms, but it's also reducing flash floods. Dry land is not absorbing water,
right?
And when it does absorb, it's evaporating. Or it runs off, and there you get, and when it's combination with snow melt, what happens more and more rain in spring and earlier snow melt, and that coincides, and then you get the risk of flooding. And when it goes into underground, by doubling the vegetation density, you can increase the infiltration 4 times, sometimes even more. And then you don't get the evaporation, but it stores underground, and other places you can use the infiltrated water again.
That's really interesting. And what are the main challenges with this project right now? Like, what are the main difficulties to get this done?
One of the key issues is the quality of the planting material, but even more is to find wide cooperation under the governments. Because they are not, it's completely new for them, the voluntary market, and they are unsure from, what are we supporting, what are we signing. But also from the UNFCCC, you have the national designated authorities, but quite often they don't know their role in the process of carbon emission and carbon sequestration. There more attention should be given into the information to the countries and to the designated national authorities, the representatives from the countries for the who can then sign on sustainability and so on for the UNFCCC to approve carbon sequestration projects.
I see. And if we were to be successful in this endeavor, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, what kind of environment would be looking at the Aral Sea? What is the best case scenario outcome of this?
The number of desert can be severely reduced, but also it stimulates the management of the water management. And you see now already that in the Kazakh part of the Aral Sea, that the surface of water is slowly increasing. It will not get back to the old situation. Therefore, too much people are dependent on the water, but there is enough water, only it can be used 2 times and even more efficient. And when that is understood, then you see the Aral Sea, the wetlands in the lower Amudarya, Sirdarya, they can increase. But also in the parts which are not sea anymore, you will see that animal life and husbandry can be developed. And on longer term, that's you will get there other forms of tourism.
Amazing to hear. So right now, when you look at it, it almost looks like a desert, right? I mean, it looks like a desert. You see, it feels like
It is a
sand.
desert.
Yeah, it feels like sand. You see some ships even like in the middle of the sand. So in the future, we can look at it, and what kind of vegetation can we expect to see there?
You get there shrub vegetation. It's the summers are too dry for trees, so you're dependent on vegetation which are deeply rooted. It can be grasses, it can be shrubs. Only we can't plant them all. That is too costly. So what you do is you take primary vegetation, which creating an environment for other vegetation. Now, saxaul is one of them. Tamarisk is one of them. Tamarisk needs a little bit more water, can stand more salt. The saxaul wants sandy soil where it can then extract the water from the sand. It doesn't like clay, salty clay. That's the biggest issue. There's not so much perspectives for salty clay land. Salignac, it's called. Therefore, I'm still looking from what could be grown there, or what you have to do to enable grow there.
And do we have a lot of salty clay in that region?
Quite a bit, yeah. But also sandy soil is there also enough. So you can't plant on any place you like. You have to investigate and then to see from where are the best situations. And what is very interesting in Uzbekistan, by intensive soil analysis, they found out that even under the Aral Sea bottom, you have fresh water lanes, or how you call it. Some places are very salt, but now you see that on some places you have big parts where the salt levels are severely low, almost fresh water.
Oh, wow.
And we don't know it, understand it fully, but that gives, when you can find them, you can severely speed up the reforestation. And that also gives some possibilities for people to live there, taking water out of the underground. So every disaster offers new opportunities. It's better when a disaster doesn't happen, but even when it's there, we have possibilities to turn the process into the other direction.
I think that's a really nice message to end, because fairly often we kind of hear that we're doomed and that there's no turning back. But it's quite the opposite. There's still opportunities there. Even, of course, it would be better if the disasters didn't exist, but of course, there are opportunities lingering underneath. And I think that's a great message of hope to everyone that, yeah, we still can do a fair bit to revert the situation that we are in.
When we understand the natural processes, then we have a lot of instruments to work with. And then nature is helping us.
That is amazing to hear.
I think the perspectives for that are even much more. And everywhere you find solutions. For example, there is the Tuyumayun water reservoir. It's silted up. And yeah, it's too costly to dig it out. But it said the water capacity is reduced with 20%. Till 20%. So it's not functioning more anymore as a water reservoir, it's an evaporation pond. I said, but can't we look at the what kind of silt is there, if we can reuse it? The sand, we found out that the sand is more sand collected there than which is imported into Central Asia for more than 10 years. The clay can be used for building, you have to stabilize it, dry it, like they do here in the Netherlands. Now in some places where you use clay from the sea, dry it, stabilize it, and then you can use it for coastal protection. But you can also, part of it, its quality, which can be used for improving the land quality. And when you do it in the right way with nature-based solutions, you can select by building dams in the water reservoir. You can select from here. You get coarse sand, fine sand, sandy clay till a fine clay, and then it's much easier to reuse it. But we have to look to think ahead of the development and for flood protection, but also for irrigation in the. I've been proposing it in, for example, Tajikistan. You have tremendous gravel beds in the upper basins where all the water is collected, and then you get floods downstreams. But you can reduce the speed in the gravel beds by using the gravel bed itself, no construction of dams, and then more water goes into the underground, and a little further you can pump it up, or you can lead it to small water reservoirs where you get storage, and you get a more stable regime. And that helps also for mitigation of the climate impact.
What I'm hearing is that there are tons of resources and tons of opportunities there. And it's not that we have to halt our production and our economic development, is that we just have to better manage everything.
Yeah, and we have to look for not only at the cost, but also at the potential income and risk reduction.
Amazing. Well, Rieks, thank you so much for being here. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope that our listeners will learn as well. I hope to welcome you again in this podcast in the near future, because I certainly have many more topics that I would love to talk to you about.
No problem.
Thank you for joining us today. The Green Earth Podcast is a DGB Group initiative. DGB is a large-scale nature-based project developer, and our goal is to help nature flourish and prosper. If you want to read more about our projects, please check our website, green.earth. The link is also in the description. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving us a review. And if you know anyone that might benefit from this content, would greatly appreciate your recommendation. I'm Pedro Zimmer, your host, and I hope to see you for the next episode of the Green Earth Podcast.